This is Ravi Brahmat with Houston Community College, and here today with Austin Tenet to share the second session for the Business Resiliency Workshop webinars. So, Austin, thank you so much for making some time for us, and please tell us about retaining and growing our portfolio of clients in this space, in this COVID-19 new world.
Great. Hey, Robbie, thank you so much for that, the brief intro, and for making all the technology work in the background. And welcome to our guests who decided to join us today. This is going to be a very thought-provoking session. Robbie, go ahead and flip. Next slide there, Robbie. Okay, great. That's me a little bit about myself, certified business coach focusing on executive leadership and entrepreneurial growth. With the Houston Community College, I've had the distinct honor of being a senior advisor and trainer in the business plan competition, and then I'm also the entrepreneur in residence at the Northeast campus. I love what HCC stands for and their focus on the entrepreneurial community, and I'm honored to be a part of this very, very important series. So today we're going to talk about retaining and growing your present portfolio of clients. And as you can see, this is installment 2 of a 7-part webinar series that we're hosting on behalf of the Office of Entrepreneurial Initiatives. We'll talk a little bit, and when we get towards the end, we'll talk a little bit about what our topic for next week. But today we're going to talk about our present portfolio of clients. Flip. Robbie? Okay, so the goal for today is a couple-fold. We want to talk a little bit about some things that we should be doing currently with our current portfolio of clients, some ideas, as they too are challenged with the responding to the COVID-19 pandemic. And then we're going to talk about how do we restart our businesses. You know, we're starting to see a few little indicators that the worst either maybe behind us or we're getting close to that point. So entrepreneurs should be great planners, not always the case, but the important thing right now is to be thinking about how do we accelerate out of this situation. Next slide. So as I said, you know, the whole idea is to get out of the gates as fast as possible. I know a lot of people that are on this phone and other entrepreneurs in the city are focused on their getting the SBA money and funds and that sort of thing. And I think that's very, very important. But I think it's also important that we run a parallel process. That as we chase the funds, the working capital needs to fund our businesses, we also have to be thinking about how things are going to change in the post-Corona-19 environment. Next slide. So if you can take away nothing from today, just remember the same old thinking creates the same old results. So we know, I don't have a crystal ball, but we're pretty darn sure that things will be different when the crisis has ended. So let's be thinking about how we can evolve and change our business models, our approaches to doing business, so that we can continue to be relevant to our customer base. Next slide. So our journey so far. Next slide. For those of you who participated last week or listened to the session 1, here were the 5 key principles around the concept of mindset that we covered. Embrace change. Change is inevitable in business. The wearing of we talked about the 3 hats of the entrepreneur, and for the more successful entrepreneurs that we see and that we know, they find their areas where they have an exceptional skill or ability, and that's where they spend the bulk of their time focusing. And then even though there's other tasks and activities inside of a business, the best entrepreneurs delegate or outsource those activities so they can focus on their areas of awesomeness. I hate to say this tongue-in-cheek, but there are some positive viruses out there. And one of those would be a great attitude. Great attitudes are very, very important to lead our teams through difficult times like this. I've always been a half full glass kind of guy, so in some respects it comes to me sort of second nature. But you as an owner, an entrepreneur, a leader of people, your ability to stay focused on the opportunities, not the problems associated with this current pandemic, are going to pay you great dividends as we come out and you endeavor to take on new opportunities. As we again come out of the crisis and focus our mindsets, we talked about the goal setting process, and then not so much the goal setting process, but how to achieve the goals that we set for ourselves. I've always said goal setting is easy. It's making them happen, which is the hard part. So if you've not seen this particular webinar, I encourage you to go back. It's in our HCC library, and you can listen to this. Then we talked about mindstorming, problem solving technique, where we can either do it by our lonesome, but it's best done in conjunction with some trusted advisors, some of our peers, to really do idea generation to find the best solutions or answers to problems or concerns that are raised as we try to figure out the way forward. Next slide, Robbie. So as I mentioned briefly before, this webinar series is tied to a business resilience workshop that we'll be hosting in conjunction with the HCC Corporate College. So you can see here are some of the 8 categories that we're going to cover. It's probably going to be an 8 to 10 week workshop series and covering these various areas. What we'll do today is we'll touch at a very high level on item number 5, which is customers, and then in the context of the workshop itself, we'll do a much deeper dive, and then there'll be assignments and reading assignments and other things so that we can customize the things that we'll talk today, relatively general, but in the workshop, you'll have the opportunity to customize these concepts and ideas specifically for your unique business and enterprise. Next slide, Robbie. So let's talk about customers. Next slide. But before we talk about customers, I think it's really important we spend a little bit of time about what kinds of behaviors we should be engaged in as it relates to our current set of clients and customers. So I like this graphic because it just kind of talks about those 4 things that are extremely important right now. So I think for most of us, our selling machines, our revenue activity is at an all-time low and further moving negative. But that will not be the world order forever. Things will come back, things will change. So in this time, as we interact with our customers, and we should be interacting with our customers on a very regular basis, it's amazing to find out that there's some number of business owners out there who either have not contacted their customers or have not contacted all of them, which I think is just malpractice. But in those connections, item number 1, the focus should be on their cares and their concerns. Right now, for many people, making money, their business is a distant second to the health of their family and their loved ones. So as you reach out, make inquiries as to what are their core needs, their concerns, what's keeping them awake, what's bothering them, and determine if you could be a resource to them, even if it means there's not any immediate sale for you right now, because the deposit you make in that emotional bank account will pay dividends at some later date. Moving to the right there, we see the meet customers where they are. I think this is somewhat obvious, but with people spending inordinate amounts of time working from home, anything that's mobile and convenient for the ultimate customer is top of mind. So I think we know that all of the food delivery services companies are doing a gangbuster business, even though the restaurants aren't doing as well because they can't host guests in their dining room. But those anything that brings groceries, meals, other incidental items, Amazon, for example, are doing really well. And so if you haven't done so already, you should be rethinking your business as to how you can accommodate people's new working behaviors, working from home or being homebound. And I'll tell you this third one here: reimagine the post COVID-19 world. This is probably where most of us are challenged the greatest because this is some science and some art because we don't know exactly when this will be behind us. And when it is when the threat per the CDC is behind us, what behaviors of our customers or our target customers have changed, and will they change forever, or are they temporary changes? So the challenge or the opportunity here is to take a look at your enterprise, understand, and then probably create 3 or 4 or multiple scenarios to understand if if behaviors don't change for another 12 months, how do you pivot your business? If things come back in the next 90 days, what does that mean for your business? Will there be some offerings and services that you currently offer that will no longer be relevant? And maybe is it time for maybe you to bring forward an idea or two that you had maybe on your plan for 2 or 3 years out? Maybe it's now time to introduce that. As I mentioned earlier, I do a fair amount of work with the Houston Business Plan competition, and we're right in the middle of it as we speak. And a couple of weeks ago, after I completed my workshop on marketing and sales and business model, we polled the crowd, and we said, hey, it was an online crowd, not an in-person crowd, but we polled our participants and said, what, based on the COVID situation, what are you guys going to have to do a little bit differently? And I would say fully about half of them had either done a 180 pivot or a 90-degree pivot, because anybody who had a business model that sort of relied on physically connecting with their target or ideal clients and customers had to immediately adopt some sort of online or virtual format. So it was very encouraging to see that aspiring entrepreneurs get the whole idea and the promise to pivot, and we're actively engaged in making that happen. And then the final one is the building agile capabilities. So I think this sort of encapsulates everything that we've talked about previously here on this slide. It's just that our ability to be very, very fluid. I mean, the old concept of having a business model or an approach to doing business that's worked for you in the last 20 or 30 years, it may not even work the next 90 days, let alone the next couple of years or so. So the whole idea here is to build agility into your organization, and there's probably a handful of ways to do that. Obviously, it's talking with people outside your organization, and more importantly, people outside of your industry. If you do any research on where innovation comes from, it's typically, some of it occurs in laboratories under the umbrella of R&D, but it's oftentimes borrowing ideas and concepts from either adjacent industries or totally different industries. Borrowing tools and tactics that worked in one industry, but could be easily, or with some challenge, replicated in your industry to give you a competitive advantage. Okay, Robbie, next. And then the power of 3, right? These cute little triplets here. But there was a study done by one of the major consulting houses, McKinsey and Company, and they analyzed companies that came out of the last recession we had, the 08-09 recession. And what the data, and it was a wonderful graphic, but what the data showed, that those companies who focused on the customer experience during the recession and the time frame after that, within 7 or 8 years after the crisis or the recession ended, they were performing at 3 times the level of performance as though they sort of chose to hunker down and I'm not going to say ignore their customers, but didn't put customer experience as one of their high points. So as we've said, as I'm sure many of us have heard, that now is not the time to stop marketing and stop being client facing. But we've seen so many companies that have stopped advertising and marketing. So, for example, there's a community newspaper in my end of town, and I say I think we get it every couple of weeks or so, but it's usually about 50 to 60 pages thick, right? And most of it is advertising. No surprise there. But I got the recent copy earlier this week, and I'm telling you, it was about 12 pages long, and what was missing was the bulk of the advertising. So people have already downshifted into hunker down, save money mode, and unfortunately, probably will be missing some opportunities based on the data here that was shared by this consulting firm. Next slide. So the problem. We talked about the problem post-COVID, but let's just talk about the problem that we probably had, before all this started as well. Next slide. In my coaching business, in the 4 or 5 years I've been doing this, and then the other 15 years I've been in the business development world, I've only recalled maybe 3 or 4 times out of the hundreds of conversations I've had where I've heard an owner say, I have all the business that I need. So before this started, we were in a hunt for finding new customers, onboarding new customers. And so I think it just gets exacerbated as we accelerate out of the crisis. Next slide. So what are the reasons? Obviously, more competition. There's tons of competition out there. And if you feel like you're that black umbrella in a sea of black umbrellas, you are in the right workshop, because we're going to talk about how to break from the pack. Next slide. So business, again, before the crisis, was moving at an ever-increasing pace. Things changing faster than ever. A lot of it was around technology. A lot of it was around the Amazon effect. Amazon has now raised the bar for delivery and performance. It used to be okay that if I got it delivered in 2 days, I was happy with that. Now, if I can't get it delivered in 2 hours, it's totally unacceptable. We'll fire our providers because they're not providing appropriate level of customer service. So that level of thinking just permeates so many industries and some of our buying behaviors. Next slide. And the killer in all this is, if we look at our current customer landscape, there's so many of our enterprises, either our current customers or at least our pipeline of opportunities and prospects is nothing more than a barren desert. And for those of us who lack the vision to see beyond the horizon of this desert, we don't see some end in here. All we see is an endless desert of nondescript sand dunes. Next slide. And so, if we're not careful, we'll adopt this attitude or mindset that we can't win, that there's nothing there for us. Next slide. So the opportunity. So as I said earlier, I'm a half full glass kind of guy, and to be truthful, in my practice, I've never been busier, because in this crisis, I've identified opportunities now that clearly weren't present, 5, 6, 7 weeks ago, and that for me it's a very exciting time, and hopefully that many of you on the call see this as an exciting time as well. Next slide. So the opportunity is, we talked about how technology is increasing the change in business, but it's also giving us better ways to communicate, most importantly, better ways to listen to our customers. So we talked about in one of the earlier slides, kind of those 4 major issues or elements we need to do to reach out to our clients. Technology in its current state allows us to do that. So I'm not saying send them all emails and ask them how they're doing. I'm talking about picking up the phone, sending them a text, using their social media platforms as ways to communicate to them. And then with certain businesses, participating in either some sort of chat room or just following online dialogue, you'll be able to glean a lot of information about what's top of mind for your customers, clients, and most importantly, your prospective clients. Because in those conversations, when they talk about their problems, their issues, their concerns, their hopes, their dreams, what are they doing? They're telling you how you should be selling to them. So when we think about that, that gives us more and better ways to serve. And I think all of us here are always looking for better ways to serve our clients. And so the concept of exceeding clients' expectations, customer expectations, I think that is that's a last millennium concept. We're in the business today, 2020 and beyond, of delighting our customers. Going far beyond this concept of expectations, of exceeding expectations. So how do we do that? We have more and better ways to showcase our expertise. I have a client; they're in the videography business, and what they did as part of their sort of get well or get in front of the wave program, they started creating video tips on how to incorporate video into your marketing mix. What they've done here in the last few weeks, they've had unbelievable response to the video tips that they're sharing and educating their community and networks with. And so now it's given them some strong indicators of some new service offerings that they might want to introduce in an effort to help not just themselves but their clients prosper as we come out of the crisis. Next slide. And the whole idea, and again, this is my positivity, but the whole idea here is to grow our business and so we can enjoy them more. Because why did we get into these businesses in the first place? Why did we take the leap of entrepreneurship? Because we wanted to do something most of us wanted to do something on our own. We wanted to create our own destiny. We wanted to do something that was going to be enjoyable to us and something that was going to allow us to focus on those skills and habits and attributes and behaviors that really bring us joy and joy and excitement to our lives. So if you think about it here, we're in for a little bit of a tough ride here for the next few months. But as we plan and plot to come out, we'll see that joy restored to our respective enterprises. So the big idea. Next slide. How wonderful would your world be if you had more customers than you can handle? Right, pipe dream. So that's the big idea, and that's what we're going to spend the next 20 or 30 minutes on is talking about how to in spite of all the less than positive news, how do we create all the customers that we can have. So before we go on, I just want to kind of peek into the chat box, Ravi. I know you've been monitoring that. Any questions or comments that you'd like to share?
So Austin, I'm just going to give you a heads up. You are going in and out.
Okay.
It's not as bad, but just maybe watch the internet because you do keep freezing for like a second every 4 minutes. So
okay.
that will be just be mindful of that. I did turn off the chat in the effort to reduce any type of lag into the call.
Okay.
I've also turned off people's mics, and so I don't have questions yet. I did ask everyone to wait till the end to ask questions. Okay.
Fair enough. Okay, I'll keep.
Just to keep this. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, because I've definitely had some internet problems again this morning. So Robbie, you, me, and my internet are just not a great combination, but we'll work through that though. All right, well, let's move on to the next slide then. So again, our focus today is on customers, the folks that are currently in our portfolio. Next slide. And what we'd like to talk about is the 5 key principles on creating more value for our existing sets of customers while also keeping an eye on how we take those principles and leverage those as we go out and identify new customers. So the concept I'd like you to think about here for a moment is the concept of internal customers versus external customers. So I don't know if any of you have played rugby, but rugby is a traditional game. It's one team against another. But as you'll see in this scrum, it is definitely one team against another, but it's also folks that are on the same team pulling together to create a unified force to overcome and beat the other team. So for anybody who's played team sports or who's worked in an environment where there's more than 2 or 3 people, that your ability to create your best work is oftentimes a function of your ability, collective ability of getting the team on the same page and having common sets of goals and visions and moving forward and executing in tandem, as opposed to fighting one another and forgetting who the real enemy is, which is basically the other team. All right, Robbie, change to the next slide. So if we think about again, this whole concept of internal and external teams, customers, if you look at yourself as you Inc. right in the middle. So if you go straight up the axis there, you'll see that we have the traditional external customers, those people who pay our invoices and that sort of thing. But then you've got in these other bubbles, these are the folks that are in the background that are helping us to make our enterprise go or helping us to be successful. So it's the staff, it's business coaches like myself, it's the banker, the accountants, the printers, all those the website, the social media people, all those partners that operate in the background that help us to be more successful. So as we talked about last week, the various roles that an entrepreneur plays, all of these roles here, for an entrepreneur that's on the top of his or her game, should be looking at not doing these other activities themselves, but either outsourcing them to members of their team inside the organization or outsourced opportunities. But we don't do that willy-nilly. We have a process to make sure that we're working with best-in-class providers, because in tandem we deliver a service that we endeavor to delight our customers with. So, Robbie, I know we were going to stop for input, but we're going to keep moving since we're having some lag challenges with the internet. So let's move on to the next slide.
Yeah. Okay. I able to chat for everyone see, but I haven't had anyone respond back yet. Okay. So if you do have any questions for Austin, please send me a private message directly to the host, and I'll read them to Austin at the end of the presentation here. Okay.
Great. Thank you.
So Austin, we're continuing on to slide 32. Yeah.
Very good. Then the competition. So when we're talking competition, oh, you got ahead of me, Robbie. So obviously, when we talk about competition, we're obviously, if we're a banker, it's definitely the bank that's right across the street from us. That's the concept of direct competition. But we also need to be conscious of indirect competition. So what is indirect competition? So a great example we like to use is, or one example we like to use is that, think of a cosmetic dentist, right? So let's say they do a nice job of implants or making really, really pretty smiles. Most of their services are elective, and so meaning that they're not covered by, for the most part, not covered by insurance. So when you think of who that dentist competition is, yeah, it's the other cosmetic dentist in the area, but it could also be something like a vacation, right? So if I got $5,000 to spend on something, I may have to make a choice between, do I buy the fancy vacation or do I invest in my teeth? So this is this concept of indirect um, of indirect competition. So if any of you remember the story of Southwest Airlines, when they were coming together under Herb Kelleher and his legendary leadership, when they talked about their business model and their approach and what they were trying to do, they didn't see other airlines as their competition. They felt that they were competing with people who were willing to drive, or maybe even people who were willing to ride a bus. That's how they perceive their competition. And they, in effect, created a business model that has turned out to be one of the most successful, I'm not going to say airline business models, because it's clearly that, but which one of the most successful business models across any industry. So as you rethink your service offering, your bundle of services, you think about the customers that you're currently serving or desire to serve in the future. What are some? It's really important to understand who's the direct competition in addition to that indirect competition. And in the workshop series that's attached to this webinar series, these are one of those areas where we'll do some really, really, really deep dives, because I can assure, having done a lot of work with entrepreneurs in the post Harvey environment, this is a concept that's very, very challenging, because behaviors are hard to evolve. We've always seen if I'm a personal insurance guy, I've always seen my competition as the agency across the street or down the street, as opposed to other forms of indirect competition. People choosing just not to have insurance, or participating in their spouse's insurance. So these are the things that we really do a deep dive into, and I think that that'll be time well spent should you decide to join us for the workshop series. Okay, Robbie, next one. Okay, keep moving on. So the good, the bad, and the ugly. So guess what, guys? We all have one or more of each of those in our current customer portfolios. In a perfect world, you'll have more good than bad, and hopefully, and then the ugly. So what is the ugly? I'll do that last, but we know what good customers are. These are the ones that we and our teams enjoy serving. They like us, we like them. They give us referrals. They pay us on time, and they're appreciative of the value that we're able to deliver to them. What are the bad? The bad are the ones that if you've ever said, if I didn't need this revenue so badly, this would be somebody that would go, because you have to overserve them. They don't pay you on time. They argue over around the invoices, and it's tough. Robbie, just go back a couple, please. And it's tough to get your team members to work on their account or their relationship or provide them service, because they're always because there's such negativity and just not a joy to be around. So the ugly, those are the clients that are kind of sitting on the fence, right? These are the ones where they're not sure if you're not sure if they're really in your camp or they're really against you. And so if we had to say, since our resources and time is so limited, if we had to focus on a group going forward, I would strongly recommend that we shed the bad as soon as we could. Continue to focus on the good and find other ways to delight them, and then work really hard on taking the ugly, again, because they're fence sitters and they can be swayed one way or the other. but here's our opportunity to get them, bring them over to our camp. And as you recall, or from earlier in the slide deck, when we were talking about how to respond in this COVID-19 environment, we gave at least 4 or 5 different opportunities or ideas that you might want to engage in to get these folks off the fence and squarely into your camp. So the question should be, or it's probably on the mind of some folks out there, is Austin, why at a time like this would I be shedding relationships? And we'll talk a little bit about that more in detail in the slides that come. But think about this. Right now, unfortunately, there's some of you out there have had to either lay off, furlough, or terminate some portion of your workforce. And if that's the case, you just don't have the resources to work with like you used to. So if you have limited resources, are you more prone to spend time with people who get your value, understand your value, and maybe the ugly who with some convincing and some influencing can come over to can become one of those good clients? So why would you spend time on a bad client, somebody who hasn't gotten it to this point, and they're never going to get it because of who they are, what they stand for. Their values are out of line with yours. So why would you you're already putting ourselves through a severe amount of stress given all that's transpired. So why would you want to increase that with a bad client? And suffice it to say, and it's been my experience, that those folks who fall into that bad client category are typically the ones that you're barely breaking even on, and oftentimes we're losing money on because they demand a low price, but at the same time demand a high level of service, or they want a lot of your time. Okay, Robbie, next slide, please. Okay, we'll keep moving through the thoughts and actions. So what we can't control, that we're in the middle of this pandemic, and we're not exactly 100% sure when we're going to come out of it. But what we can control is who we pursue or evolve or chase as customers, right? And I think this is probably one of the bigger challenges that I think that most companies have. One of my networking groups, I always made the joke, when you'd ask them what does an ideal customer look like for them, this is a person that sold women's cosmetics, they'd say things like anybody with a face. So, and it's really hilarious, because what it tells me is that person hasn't done any thinking about what their business is. Something much more profound, much more actionable for me, if they were looking for me to help them generate referrals, would be, well, Austin, an ideal client for me would be a professional woman, probably somebody with an advanced degree, who works in a very, very professional setting, finds herself regularly in front of other clients and internal teams, giving presentations, teaching, educating, and it's just really important to her that her appearance is at 110% at all times. Now, if you were to share something like that with me, now I could go from my LinkedIn connections of 3,000, and I could probably figure out 10, 15, 20 people, women, that would fit that profile, or that avatar, I would like to call them. So in this example, this particular business, when we asked them what their ideal customers were, they said it was kind of mature couples, mature single men, mature and mature women, kind of 50 and above, and then it was the young up and comers for this particular business. So what they did was, out of literally the 7 billion people that are on this planet, they said, this is the group that I can best serve. In much of the work that I do, I would say settling or getting to the ideal customer probably causes the most angst, because with so many companies there's a desire to be all things to all people, and of course if that's your game plan, you end up being nothing to no one. So next slide, Robbie. So the importance of creating that ideal customer, or creating that customer avatar, if you will, it takes a lot of pressure off of us as the product or service provider. Because if you've got a relatively narrow ideal customer, now you can position yourself to excel and truly delight them. So if you look at this progression of focus for client value, if you look at the two far left boxes, values and strengths, and experience and expertise, I want you to think of those as those are the items that we, as the business owner, the service provider, that's what we're bringing to the relationship, right? Our values, our strengths, and our expertise and experience. Now, the reality, and let's just be real. There's 7 billion people on this planet, and as weird as it sounds, there's going to be a few people that don't like Austin, or don't share my values and that sort of thing. But and guess what? That's okay, because I am not for everyone, whether it be my expertise, whether the things I value, and the things that I want to focus on. So if I'm able to get those other folks, several billion of those folks off the boat, I'm better positioning myself for success. Because as we move over to the next set of boxes in the middle there, again, this whole segment and avatar, and then the fears, frustration, wants, and aspirations, those are the things that we're looking for as it relates to our target client. So our ability to discover, to understand, and to address those is what's going to make us of high value to that target market, right? So let's say I want to go after firefighters or emergency management people, policemen and firemen, and then I also want to go after ballerinas, right? And then what I've got is an industrial safety product, right? Now, sure, the ballerina might buy it once every 5 or 6 years, and more than likely buy it as a gift for someone else. But in my desire to be all things to all people, I'm going to frustrate the heck out of myself trying to sell to that ballerina and his or her compatriots, as opposed to working in the emergency management arena. It's just going to be painfully obvious that these are going to be tools or offerings that these folks will either use in their day-to-day job, and or use or can easily refer me to people within their networks that could be that these services would be of intense value to. Okay, next slide. So the most powerful thing that we can do as we, again, endeavor to segment the market, develop that ideal client, is to learn their thoughts. And this is in the, and we'll talk about this in a later series, but this is the whole concept of marketing, and more specifically positioning. So when we think of positioning, we think about positioning as the space in our customer or client's brain that we own. We've carved it out for them. So if we were in a live session, right now I would go around the room and say, when I say Volvo, what comes to mind? And most of you would say safety. And if I said BMW, you'd have something, the unbelievable driving machine. And then I say Mercedes, you'd say extreme uber luxury. And if I were to say Kia, and if I were to say Lamborghini, there's a place in your brain that you've carved out about what you think and feel about those specific brands. So it doesn't just appeal or apply to global brands like I just described. It applies to the corner dentist, the corner grocery store, you as an attorney. What is it that you want to be known for? And so your ability to find like-minded people and really be able to understand how they think so that you can be a resource to them, will make you an unstoppable force in the segmented or narrow market that you've selected for yourself. Because let's go back to it. On the slide before where we had ideal customers, you notice there were 4 pictures, and that was by design. Because in the workshop, as we talk about people identifying their ideal customers, we strongly suggest that you identify no more than 4, right? Because when you get beyond 4, the brain the brain and your bandwidth can only handle so much, particularly if you're a smaller enterprise. 1 is okay, but 4 is definitely the max. Because when you get to up to 4, you're pretty much hitting the limits on if you're going to do this correctly of how you can keep all of these client core cares and the related information that we'll talk about a little bit more on the next slide in top of mind for you as you endeavor to serve your target market or your target avatars. Next slide. Okay, good. And then the final 2 boxes are the ones far to the right. So hang on, let me go back a second. So as we again take this journey, and the 2 middle boxes, that we identify the segment, the avatars, we understand the fears, frustrations, and the wants and aspirations of our clients. Now we've positioned ourselves to be a resource to our ideal clients when an issue arises. The reality of it is, unfortunately, when we're with our customer set, people are only ready to buy in very, very small windows. So as a result, we've got to be top of mind on them. We're going to be top of mind on them year round, even though they may only buy in November or October or January, whatever their buying habits is. But if we're aware of their hot buttons and what they value, again, so this goes back to the research that we've done and the learnings we've done about our customer segments, they will think of us. Next slide. So that when they have a 911 call, that we'll be the first one they'll call us, because we've already demonstrated that we know their key concerns. We've educated them enough that they know that we're able to address their current circumstances, and we can be a great resource to them. Go ahead, Robbie. So as we wrap up here, our 5 key principles as it relates to customers, again, it's understanding that your internal team is part of your value delivery to delight your external customers. When we think competition, it's not just direct competition, it's the indirect competition as well. And of course, everybody's number 1 competitor is status quo. Look at your current profile of customers, identify the good, bad, and ugly, and run fast from anybody who's bad. Because again, there's not enough time as we re-engineer our businesses to deal with bad customers. Identify who your ideal customer is, and anywhere from 1 to 4, and then do your darndest to learn as much about their issues, concerns, their psychographics. What do they dream about? What are their aspirations? So that you can be, as we said in number 5, learn their thoughts, so that you can be the only firm that they think about when it's time for them to acquire goods and services that are in your wheelhouse. Next slide. So, Rob, this is probably a good time to turn back on the chat room and see if there's any questions or comments.
Yeah, I do have one, Austin, and
Okay.
it's basically how can you be so positive that customers will reappear after this COVID-19 in large numbers? How are you so positive?
So, great question. And so I'm positive is because the reason businesses thrive is because of a business owner's ability to solve a problem, right? So, without even having a crystal ball, I know that the COVID-19 pandemic has created a new set of problems, right? So customers and so people are dying either currently or in the not too distant future. They want to address and or solve those problems. What I can't be sure of is how you as a business owner can morph, evolve, pivot with your business to solve them. If you can't solve them, somebody else in the market will. But people will be coming back to address those problems because one of the things that we teach in sales class 101 is pain pain that prospects or customers have. Current pain is people will pay almost anything to make that current pain go away. And again, as we come out of as we come out of this downturn, there will be a lot of current pain that needs to get addressed. So yes, the customers will be coming back. I just can't tell you where and specifically what their buying behaviors or patterns will be. Okay.
Austin, another question is about your suggestion shedding customers. When you were mentioning, why would you talk about shedding customers if we're a business owner trying to grow?
Yeah, so that's always the conundrum. It's almost oxymoronic, right? When customers have left us in great numbers, why would we be thinking about getting rid of them? Because I'll just say it succinctly, bad customers um, eat up far more. They take away from our businesses far more than they contribute because they typically are buy on price and they typically want more service than what they paid for. So it just makes all in all for a pretty miserable situation for the client. And again, there's so much opportunity in the marketplace, particularly as we come out of the event and as we endeavor to reinvent our businesses. There's no time to spend with these really negative customers that aren't doing a lot to help us, and most importantly, they don't share the value that we deliver to the marketplace.
Austin, I have two questions here that are not necessarily connected to customers or marketing, but they're good business questions. One is about employees. Will there be a large supply of potential employees to hire from this because of folks being laid off?
So it's interesting you asked that they posed that question because I was leading a webinar earlier this week with one of the major HR recruiting firms or outsourcing firms here in town. And so the question is interesting because for some people, with some of the government subsidies, they can now make more money, not permanently, but at least for the first 8 months, they can make more money being on unemployment with some of the additional subsidies than they could, maybe working in their traditional role. Some people just may not come back just because of the emotional trauma they sustained through going through this. And maybe some people will say, this is the signal I needed to go do something different. So I'm not going back to my old employer. I'm not going back to my old job. Great people, great talent will always have their pick of opportunities. And one of the things that I'm sharing with my client group is that this is also the time to be looking at should you be maybe looking at upskilling your job, your workforce. Because if you think about it, if your business has to pivot and maybe take on do some different service offerings, or products and that sort of thing, maybe the folks that, unfortunately, this is a really unfortunate situation, but maybe the folks that were helping you before the crisis are not going to be the people that are going to help you post-crisis. So it's going to be a really topsy-turvy sort of market. And then, as I've shared with people, this whole crisis became real for me when I read the article about our local Tillman Fertitta owner of the Rockets and the and Landry's, when he laid off 40,000 people in 1 week. So I mean, the whole concept of re-onboarding, 40,000 people plus, and how quickly or how slowly you do that and that sort of thing. It's just the whole employment piece has just got so many more variables, but nobody's spending a lot of time talking about it because everybody's so many people are focused on getting that SBA money, understandably so, and that there's some really long-term employer-employee issues that need to be addressed sooner rather than later.
All right, Austin. So being mindful of time, this is the last question. It's unrelated to the topic here, but you choose to pick if you want to answer it. But being mindful of time, this is the last question.
Okay.
He's saying they're saying that their vendors are currently desperate. So these are suppliers. They're currently desperate because they also are trying to move a product. Would it be a good advice right now to buy the cheapest to improve profitability for this business that's in the retail side? Would it be a good advice to do that right now?
So the quick answer is no, and because oftentimes buying cheap is the most expensive way. What I'll do is I'll keep that for one of our future sessions, because we're going to one of the future webinars we're going to get into sort of managing your extended network of stakeholders and providers. So we'll definitely I'll make certain that we address that in the future webinar. But thanks for asking.
All
so
right.
We got a couple more slides here. Just be so kind, and then we'll wrap up. 2 more slides, Robbie.
All right. You are.
Okay. So again, thanks for the time that we spent here together today. But none of this makes sense if we don't take some action against it. So again, what I would suggest is the recording of this will be available. I encourage you to re-listen to it and then figure out a game plan. Just figure out 2 or 3 things that you can do with your current set of customers, to bring them closer to you. Let them know that you're thinking about them, and that you love them, and you want to be a resource to them during the pandemic and after it, and then start putting some actions in place to make that happen. Then in our final slide, again, the workshop series is going to be done in conjunction with the corporate college. So if you want to get more information on that, you can. Their number is there on the slide, along with their email address. And so we're again putting in the final stages of putting the workshop together. So hopefully we'll be launching that in the next few weeks. Next week we talk about restarting the revenue engine. It's going to be very exciting. We're going to take some of the key concepts from today's session and incorporate that into what we do to go out and get new customers. So again, I just like to next slide, Robbie. So again, just like to thank you. If there's anything where I can be a resource to you, there's my contact information. If you'd like a copy of the slides, you just go ahead and text me. I'd be happy to share them with you. And Robbie, I want to thank you for being such a great technical partner on this, and making keeping an eye on the chat room and making the slides go. So appreciate that.
Thank you so much, Austin. All right, we appreciate you as well at HCC. Thank you so much, everybody. We'll end the session. Please do leave the meeting. And Austin, thank you once again. The next session will be next Thursday at 12 p.m. And you can register for it by going to our website, hccs.edu/smallbusiness. I'll go ahead and put that in the chat for everyone. And thank you again for your time. This meeting will end in about a minute. I will mute everybody and wrap this up. Thank you so much. Austin, thank you again.
Thanks, Robbie. Appreciate it. Okay, take care.